like to introduce Professor Sir Roy Augier, who is a former lecturer Professor Emeritus of the University of the West Indies. What are your recollections of the socio-political environment at the time in Jamaica at the point of the report on the Rastafari community?
I'm glad you asked that question, because without it, the report, and that is the operative word in the title, the report really can't be understood. We weren't doing research in the normal academic sense. We were doing a study for a particular purpose. The context is to be found really in a short description of how Rastafarians got established in Jamaica. The link with Garvey is obvious, and it has to be understood particularly because it affects the later Rasta connection to the Eastern Caribbean, down to Guyana. And in Jamaica, one can list three of the important people to whom the later Rastafarian movement belonged, namely Leonard Howell, Archibald Dunkley, and Joseph Hibbert. And these three, between themselves, took their inspiration partly from Bedford and partly from Marcus Garvey, who was the 1920 prophet, so to speak, of Jamaica. And the Howell and Hibbert and Dunkley belong to the 1930s. Now, one of the significant elements in Rasta's relation to society on the whole is their connection with the Bible, particularly the Old Testament. And that accounts for some of the violence of their language, and particularly for the propensity of some of them to use that language in their public speech against what they called black and white oppressors. It also led to some actual violence by some people, although that violence was not unprovoked. So in the late 1930s, some significant clashes with the police, the most significant being in Coronation Market, later on in Pinnacle, where Howell had established himself, and most important in the 50s, when there was an attack on ganja smoking and on the wearing of beards, both of them linked with the propensity of some Rastas or bearded men to use violence. Then the new person on the block becomes the Claudius Henry, the language, and the 1959-1960 encounters with the police, which led to Claudius Henry being sentenced to 10 years in jail. So the report came out of the conflicts in Pinnacle, the killing of people, some of them policemen, who were supposedly spying on Pinnacle, the killing of some shopkeepers in Kingston, and the general insecurity of the middle class, that there were a group of people linked to the Castro revolution in Cuba, and to some extent to the leftists in Jamaica who wanted to overthrow the government of Jamaica.
I want to ask you, how did you come to be involved in the writing of the report?
Some Rastas were in touch with the Vice Chancellor. Some of the persons who were not Rastas but who were concerned about whether there was the likelihood of a violent movement to overthrow settled authority were in touch with Rex Nettleford. And the two elements, those in touch with Rex Nettleford and those who were in touch with the Vice Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor being Arthur Lewis, they came together, because we have the evidence of correspondence in which Rex Nettleford and the Vice Chancellor are in correspondence. I myself personally have it from Mortimer Plano that he contacted Arthur Lewis about the need for help. The point of that correspondence or personal relation was whether the university could attempt to help persuade the government of Jamaica and the middle class in general that the Rastas were not, as a whole, in favor of violence, and they were not in favor of any revolutionary activity in the society. So Arthur Lewis responded that the university could help, or would attempt to help, if the Rastas who had contacted himself and Rex Nettleford were willing to agree that they would be subject to the university's terms. Namely, we were not going to be on a propaganda mission in favor of the Rastas. We would undertake a scholarly effort to explain to all who cared to know what the Rastas were about. And Arthur Lewis selected Michael Smith, M.G. Smith, Rex Nettleford, and myself to conduct this study. Michael Smith of that group was really the one who was most advanced in his knowledge about the Rasta movement. Rex Nettleford, as I've indicated, had contacts with various groups, including Rastas, that wanted help from the university, and I was the kid on the block. A report which was not only addressed to the middle class, it was addressed also directly to the government of Jamaica. And those of you, I speak to the audience, who have a copy of the report or who are interested in the report, you can get it from the Caribbean Quarterly office at the university, will see that the last section of the report is directly addressed under the title "What the Rastas Want" to the government of Jamaica about the things it could do, because Arthur Lewis was independently in contact with Norman Manley about action in relation to the settling of the Rastas in terms of repatriation, but also in terms of alleviation of their social condition.
Okay.
What Mike Smith, Rex and myself did was to agree to partition off Kingston. We didn't go out of Kingston, right? And we didn't interview Claudius Henry, who was the last of the sources of the disagreement and stuff with the police and the action, the violence and so on, right? But we interviewed various Rasta groups within the Kingston area, and so we split up and did that, wrote our notes and contributed them to the Vice Chancellor, who brought the report together and edited it, because I want to stress again, it was his report to the government of Jamaica. He wanted things done about the condition of the Rastas.
Okay.
So what I did was frequently to go down, spend late into the evening with groups, sit in tattoos, listen to Rastas reasoning, smoking ganja whilst they reasoned, with me taking notes of what they were saying, right? And making clear in my mind what I would say to the police if they barged in on the tattoos where I was. I must also add in all candor that I felt sometimes, not in the evening, not when I was ready with what I might call real Rastas, but sometimes during the day when I wandered about and people, because if I might interrupt myself, we were frequently invited, I was, and I think the same happened with Rex, we were frequently invited by leading Rastas to come to this part or that part. So sometimes I was out in the open with them. And I found that it was useful to attach myself to those Rastas who were interested in helping me, through me, the university, understand the life they led, their thoughts about the divinity of Rastafari, of Haile Selassie, and of how they related to the better off in the society. And stay away from, or maneuver myself in the crowd, away from those who I regarded after a while as mentally ill, because they tended to be both violent in their language, and they were not really interested in persuading me or listening to anything that I asked or so, but rather to the fire and brimstone talk. There were two aspects. The societal one could be seen in the way in which we had to reprint the report several times, and the principal buyers from the Institute of Social and Economic Studies, who published the report on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, was the way in which the Rastas bought it, and we only discovered when we were in the third reprint that we were selling it to them, I think for 9p, and they were selling it for 2 and 6. Well, fine. It got disseminated in this way. So the report was really widely read, but my own personal experience can stand for the social impact that it had with the middle class. Quite frequently, people would start discussions with me about the Rastas, placing them in the most unfavorable light. And I was quite patient in responding, and usually in the end, the person who started the communication, the conversation I should say, hostile to the Rastas, would suddenly remember that they were employing Rasta as a gardener or something else, handyman from time to time, and that he was honest, that he worked hard. So they already had information which somehow was masked by the general fear of all Rastas, but they usually knew individuals who did not fit that image. So by taking them patiently through the knowledge that I had acquired from what Michael Smith and Mike M.G. Smith had written and what Rex had told me, one found that their attitude to Rastas began to change. I have to bring in Coral Gardens as indicating that there was always a subterranean. The report didn't exactly cleanse the society of this hostility and fear of Rastas, as the details of the Coral Gardens indicates. But since Coral Gardens, I think, and all the reasoning with the police away from cutting beards, the admission of Rasta children to schools without humiliating them, all of that has really made a great difference. No, I have no reservations about the way the report was done. I have stressed that we all contributed to it in different ways, and I have said how important Mike Smith was to the historical chapters and the theological aspects of the movement, because he was already a specialist on Africa. He was already working on the contemporary history of Jamaica, and he had already written up notes on the stuff. So there is no mystery about how we managed within 2 weeks to percolate sufficiently accurately the current condition of the Rastas within Kingston, and at the same time have a written draft for the Vice Chancellor to edit. And he did edit it, he reduced it. I mean, in other words, it was not to be an academic thing, it was to be an action report on which the government of Jamaica would act. Aspects of the recommendations were those that the government of Jamaica was expected to incorporate within its budget. The other bits related to how to persuade enough Rastas that although repatriation was understandable and even desirable, it was a practical thing, right, about where in Africa they would settle, because part of sending them to Africa, or sending a group of them, was to establish the nature of the geography and the politics of Africa framework. That wasn't very successful, to tell you the truth. I remember Mortimer Plano, who I have high regard for, and unjustified regard for his rhetorical capacity, his intelligence, his understanding of the realities of life. And I heard him in Coronation Market on the return from Africa make a long speech in which he was conveying to a very large crowd the likelihood that repatriation would take place on any scale to be very small, if not zero. But these words never came out of Mortimer's mouth. He just circled and circled and circled and got closer to the point he wanted to convey. And I'm sure the crowd at Coronation Market, for the most part, got the message. Right? The report released the whole energy of studies to everybody who wants to know. Turn to the articles in Caribbean Quarterly, look at the collections of essays that Michael Barnett and Ian Moxell and Carolyn Cooper have assembled, and they will find there what is the result of what I speak of, the energizing effect on intellectuals that the report has had.